All right. So thank you so much for having us. Really appreciate that. And also shout out to Visa. I didn't catch the entire chunk in Spanish because I know like 12 words, but everywhere I go in Latin America, from Montevideo to Miami to Mexico, Visa has been a huge supporter of startups and fintech. So I'm glad that they are doubling down on what you guys are doing in the accelerator. So Kevin and I are going to play off each other a little bit. But I think we should start with, what's the difference between B2B sales than B2C sales?
Kevin, you're muted.
There we go. We're good.
There you go.
Oh yeah, now we're hot.
Awesome.
It's my first webinar, guys. I'm sorry.
Not true.
So I think there's a lot of differences between B2B and B2C. But what I think everyone also needs to keep in mind as we talk through this is, at the end of the day, it's always B2P, right? Like, you're selling to people. No matter how you do this, there's normally a person at the other end that's buying. And so when I think B2B, there tends to be more decision makers involved, right? Like, multiple people have to agree, multiple people have to sign off on it. Also with B2B versus B2C, things tend to take a little bit longer as well. There's more nuances, more legalities, more steps, bigger contracts, things like that. Where B2C, or actually the industry I'm in right now, is like B to sole proprietor. So technically my company sells to businesses, but it's business owners, right? So it's 1 to 2 people that we need to convince to do it. So I think those are some of the biggest differences I see between the two. I'd be curious to kind of get your take on it.
Yeah, I mean, when I talk to founders, they often have gotten into, they say, oh, I don't know anything about sales. And maybe a lot of you can relate to this, like feeling like sales is really foreign because you're a product manager who has started a company, or maybe you're a marketer who started a company or came from another background. And when I hear that, I think, well, you started the company for a reason, and you did a bunch of customer development to know the product that you're building is right for a particular industry. User interviews tend to come more naturally to people who are running startups. And so if you take that user interview and you instead think about it as a buyer interview, and instead of just saying, hey, as a user, do you think this button should be green or blue? But instead you ask the question, okay, if the button is green, does that change how you're going to get this purchase for your company or for yourself? And so just think about it as a user interview and think, okay, the person that I'm serving, are they also the person who's buying? And so if I'm, like one of the companies that I'm a big fan of there in Mexico City is Raw Apothecary, and they sell beauty supplies and, natural healthcare items to mostly women, but some men, but they're selling direct as an e-commerce play. And so the question on, hey, how would you buy this, is going to be very different from somebody who's deciding what to put in their own medicine chest at home for their nighttime skin routine, than if you are selling a kit to like one of the physicians that Kevin works with, right? So if you sell a doctor, like, hey, here are these 5 things that you need for your practice, right? That decision is going to be made very different than if you were to scale up and say, hey, I want to sell into a 7-Eleven chain to put these products, or whatever the kind of the quick service pharmacy, like a Rite Aid or Walgreens in the States, and I'm going to sell into them. Now we've got a buyer who has to talk to a whole committee worth of people inside that pharmacy to decide whether or not your products go in. And I think that's a kind of a way to think about, like, who is your perceived user? Are they the person that's actually going to give you money for this? And then start to design a process around that, right? So I agree with you, Kevin, like, B2P, these are all people, but if inside a company, people have bosses and everybody reports to somebody. In a household, you sell a couch. I don't make the decisions on couches alone. My wife and I talk about that. We ask the kids what they're not going to jump on, usually a lie. But then at work, you say, hey, I want to sell you this piece of marketing software. I'm going to bring 3 or 4 other people into that conversation.
And one thing I think you said well there, and it's a good segue into how to prospect, is when you sell B2B, there tends to be a user, someone who actually uses your product. There's someone who's impacted by your product. So they don't even use it, but they're impacted by it. And then you have a buyer. B2C, the user, the impacted, and the buyer tends to be the same person, right? Ryan said he's going to buy a mattress. He's buying the mattress, he's impacted by the mattress, he's going to use the mattress. If I'm buying a piece of software, like I run a large sales team, I may not even use the software that I'm buying. My team uses the software. The impact comes from the results, and I happen to be the buyer of it. So this is where, as you start to prospect, which I think is the first bullet point here on how to do B2B prospecting, it's knowing the differences between the users of your product, the people that are impacted by your product, and who the actual buyer of your product is. Because oftentimes when people are prospecting, they only try to go after the buyer, right? We've always been taught to go top down, right? Go after the CEO or go after the VP. But if I don't actually use your product, it can be very challenging to get my attention. Whereas if you started with the user and get in there and find out what the problems, and this is going to be my biggest tip here on prospecting, if you can find out the problems of the business, that's what makes prospecting so much more powerful. If you can find out from the users where the problems are, that's the information you bring to the top to try to set more appointments.
So somebody online is thinking right now, how do I find the problems inside the companies that I want to buy from me? And I want to offer an idea on that. So Kevin mentioned that he's running a big sales team. He's responsible for all the sales software, and probably some of the marketing software touches that world. A very common sales application is Salesforce as the main CRM. Sometimes, startups coming up will use a tool like HubSpot. I've seen, startups at 500 LATAM use both. Let me give you a quick example. If I talk to somebody with a 10-person sales team and they're using HubSpot as the marketing tool and the sales tool, and they've got 10 people on the team, I know they probably spent somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000 on that software suite. I talk to the same group of people, but they say I'm using Salesforce. I'm using email send tool like SalesLoft. I know Kevin's a fan of the SalesLoft guys. Outreach.io is another example. So I've got to have an enterprise Salesforce, and it's got to connect to this sales software. And then I use maybe Marketo to send the email for the marketing team. Well, that group of 10 people figured out how to spend about $100,000 on software for their sales team, whereas team number one is probably spending 3 or 5. And so if you're thinking whatever market you're serving, whether it's a market full of doctors or lawyers or solopreneurs, or you're selling into big companies like GE or Verizon or whatever, find out the other software that's in for that buyer and user, right? So think about your buyer and user that go together like Kevin just described. And then think about what are the other tools they use? How much did it cost? How did they buy it? And instead of showing up and saying, hey, I've got a new widget, will you buy this from me? In your user interview, say, what are the other tools that your team needs you to support? And they'll say, oh, well, for IT, we use this tool. For provisioning, we use this tool. For marketing, we use this tool. Ask how that was bought. How'd you buy Salesforce? How did you buy the software that you manage your warehouse management suite? How'd you buy that? What tool is it? Who signed off on it? How much was it? How long did it take to implement? These are all questions you can ask that are going to start to reveal this pain piece that Kevin just talked about, knowing what pain exists for the user and the buyer and the other people that are around that decision process.
Because oftentimes I've sat through them. You guys will do your user interviews, right? Or you're doing your surveying, and you're trying to run the product by your industry. But a lot of the questions will focus on the product. What do you want it to do? How does it do this? Do you like this? Do you like that? But there's not enough questions asked on the problems the product will solve, right? And so what I do when I go into a new industry, and this is something I'm very proud of, like I've crossed 4 different industries now as a sales leader and have found success, right? It's not just selling one thing through it. What I do is I go in and I talk to at least 30 customers, and I ask them these questions. Why did you buy? How would you describe what the product does? What problems were you hoping to solve with this product? What were you afraid of before buying this product? How did you decide to buy? And what's changed the most since you've bought? If you get those 6 questions answered by 20, 30, 40 customers, now when we talk about cold calling scripting and we talk about emailing and we talk about social selling, Now you can actually use the language of the customer. There's also too, you guys built the product, so you get it. You know the inner workings. You understand everything. Your prospect might not. You have to use the prospect's language when you're prospecting. People forget that. A lot of early founders and salespeople across the country and the world, they do, it's not prospecting, it's like productation. It's all about the product. It's nothing about the prospect. So you got to use their language when you're prospecting.
I like that. Hey, Katie, will you talk a little bit about the difference between what a founder should do when they're selling their like first stranger with a product? Maybe they're under 10K of revenue, and somebody who might join like your company where they're joining a 100-person plus sales team, and maybe they're a sales development person or an AE who comes and joins a team later. How should those two personas think differently about prospecting?
For sure. So honestly, I think the thing that pops into my head first is, as the founder, you have to understand no one else is going to be able to sell like you. You're the founder. Not only do you know the product better, but you probably know the industry better. You have the title and you have a confidence about you as the founder because you know it inside and out. So
industry expert.
Like you are an industry expert, right? And so what you, as a founder for selling, what you have to remember is you actually have to slow down a little bit, because you might know so much about the product that when you're selling early on, like you're just this, and people are like, whoa, like I just heard of you guys, right? So when a founder is selling, generally speaking, you need to slow down a little bit and only focus on, and this will be the hard thing, only focus on the parts of your product that the prospect cares about. You're gonna want to tell it everything because you know everything it can do. Slow down, do proper discovery so that you're only talking about the things that your prospect needs to hear. Or on the flip side, the SDR, your goal is to become an industry expert. It's to shadow your CEO and listen to what they say. It's reading all the relevant blog articles and forums and books on your industry. It's connecting with the thought leaders in the industry you're selling to so you can become an industry expert. Because that's something where a lot of salespeople don't know what it's like to be prospected. I get prospected all the time, and I can tell when that salesperson has no idea what a VP of sales does. No idea. They use messaging that doesn't make any sense. So to wrap on that, founders, slow down, and you don't have to sell your whole product. You really don't. New sales rep, you need to learn the product very well, but more importantly, you need to learn the industry because that's going to make you more confident.
Mm-hmm. I want to. We had a question in this chat that I want to call out a little bit. When you think about this kind of pain point and you think about getting to the person who has that pain, you might be in a situation where you're selling to somebody or prospecting them and use their language. You understand what their life is like. Let's say, you're selling a tool like Jimmy asked about online fashion education, right? And so the buyer is somebody who's either attending the class or they're attending the class and the parent pays for it. Now, on the B2P sales model that Kevin's talking about, you think about this as just all people. You've got somebody who needs the product and somebody else who signs off on it, like having a parent pay for a class, the same way that if I want to buy a sales tool, I might have to go to a VP of sales like Kevin's role and say, hey, boss, I like this. It's $3 a month. Can I use the company credit card to try it out? If I like it, can I buy it for the team? Now think about the person who's prospecting in both of those situations. They need to understand that role well enough, and the school model is interesting because most of us have been through a school experience. And so if you think about like a school experience, like Jimmy asked about, if we know, okay, as a student, I potentially have a parent who might be paying for this. Well, your first question is going to be, are you paying for this yourself or is a parent paying for this? Do you have college savings or are you taking out a loan? All of those are going to change the conversation. Now, they might be super direct things to ask in your first 10 minutes of talking to somebody. So maybe you ask other questions. What other classes have you taken? Why did you take that class? Oh, my dad recommended me try this thing. Okay, now I know that your dad's involved in your decision-making process. In the startup world, right? Maybe you've got a company of 10 people. The designer buys a product like Envision. I'm very supportive of Envision. They're an early client of mine. So your designer buys this thing, and they go to the CEO and say, hey, I think everybody should have a login. All right, if I understand that person's pain, I can talk to them a little bit about how they're going to share it internally. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think
Sorry to interrupt. It's time to go to the next topic, and probably by the end we can go back to keep going deeper in this one.
We need 90 seconds more. We got to talk about tools. The question of tools came up.
90 more seconds, and we're jumping back to topic number 2.
Kevin, 3 prospecting tools that are not your CRM.
Yes. So you need a data tool. You need a data tool that can help you get contact information for your prospects. So a Zoom info, a Rocket Reach, a salesintel.io. First, you need contact info. Seamless.ai is another good one, because if you can't get in touch with them, it doesn't matter. The next thing is you need a sales engagement tool. So something that's going to map out your sales process. So a Sales Loft, an Outreach, an Apollo, Mixmax is a low-cost option for a lot of startup founders, but where you can build out when you call, when you email, when you touch, and that's all mapped out for you. And then if you're growing, you need a coaching software, something that you can listen in on how the calls are going and give feedback on yourself or on your reps to improve.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
What's a good recommendation around coaching software?
Sorry, Gong is a great one. Right. Exec Vision is a great one, and Chorus. Those are the big 3 in the game right now. But actually, on that, Sales Loft and Outreach are both also starting to offer some of the coaching tools in their program as well.
Awesome.
So I would just say that, step 1 is understand what your process is. And process was kind of asked in this question, but you have already, as a product-driven founder, you've already drawn out what you think the user is going to do with your product. Now go draw out what you think the sales process should be of somebody bringing this product in. And when you find out that step 3 is a meeting where there's 10 people that need a demo, well, then we need to talk about a demo tool. Maybe you're on Zoom, maybe you're recording a video. So build pick and choose the tools, because you can't pay for all the ones that Kevin just listed, but pick and choose the tools based on what process is needed, because you understand your buyer's pain and you understand that buying process of how they're going to take it and get their boss to give you budget.